London, 1819. Rain poured heavily over the city streets as Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft stepped out of his carriage. At 34, the Duke of Ashcroft was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England. Yet behind his title and fortune, he was known for one thing above all else: his cold heart. Since the death of his wife 5 years earlier, Nathaniel had become a man consumed by work and bitterness. Society feared him, servants obeyed him, and no one dared challenge him, which was precisely why everyone fell silent when he entered Blackwell's auction house that evening. Nathaniel had come only to settle a business matter, nothing more. But then he heard a voice. "Please." He turned and saw her. A young woman stood on the auction platform, trembling. Her simple blue dress was torn, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Her name was Miss Clara Bennett, 24 years old, orphaned, and drowning in debt left behind by her late father's business partner. Unable to repay what she supposedly owed, she had been sold into contractual servitude for 30 nights to the highest bidder. Nathaniel frowned in disgust, not at her, at the men surrounding the stage, laughing, smirking, treating her like property. Clara's eyes were filled with terror, and for reasons he couldn't explain, something inside the Duke snapped. £1,000. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer blinked. "Your Grace." Nathaniel's expression remained cold. £1,000. No one dared outbid the Duke. Moments later, the contract was placed into his hands. Clara stood frozen, tears still running down her cheeks. As the crowd dispersed, she whispered, "Why?" Nathaniel looked away. "Because I was in a bad mood." She stared. That had to be the strangest answer she had ever heard. An hour later, Clara sat nervously inside the Duke's carriage. Neither spoke. Finally, she gathered enough courage. "What happens now?" Nathaniel unfolded his newspaper. "You'll stay at Ashcroft Manor." Her voice trembled. "And after 30 nights? You'll be free." She blinked. "That's all?" "Yes." "You don't expect anything from me?" Nathaniel lowered the newspaper. "No. But the contract." "I bought the contract." "Not you." Clara stared at him, unable to understand. Why would a man spend a fortune only to ask for nothing? The servants of Ashcroft Manor nearly fainted when the Duke arrived with a young woman. Mrs. Abigail, the elderly housekeeper, gasped. "Your Grace." Nathaniel handed her the contract. "Prepare a room." Mrs. Abigail read the document and nearly dropped it. But one look at the Duke's face convinced her not to ask questions. Within minutes, Clara found herself in a beautiful bedroom larger than the entire apartment she had grown up in. Fresh clothes, warm food, a roaring fireplace, felt unreal. That night, she cried herself to sleep, not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in months, someone had shown her kindness. Days passed. Nathaniel remained distant. He rarely spoke. He spent most evenings alone in the library. But Clara soon noticed things no one else seemed to see. The terrifying Duke secretly fed stray cats. He paid for the village orphanage. And every Sunday morning, he visited a grave, always carrying white roses. One evening, unable to control her curiosity, Clara asked Mrs. Abigail, "Whose grave does he visit?" The old woman smiled sadly. "His wife, Lady Elizabeth?" Mrs. Abigail nodded. "He loved her more than life itself." Clara's heart ached. No wonder he looked so lonely. One rainy night, Nathaniel returned home later than usual. He was exhausted, and for the first time in years, he heard laughter inside his manor. He froze. Following the sound, he entered the drawing room and stopped. 3 orphan children sat on the carpet. Mrs. Abigail was laughing, and Clara was playing the piano while the children sang. For the first time in 5 years, Ashcroft Manor felt alive again. Nathaniel simply stood there, watching, unable to explain why his chest suddenly felt tight. Then one of the children spotted him. "The Duke!" Everyone turned. Clara immediately stood. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. I should have asked." But Nathaniel surprised them all. He looked at the children, then at Clara, and quietly said, "No, please continue." Because for the first time since Elizabeth's death, the silence no longer felt comforting. And for reasons he could not understand, he no longer wanted to be alone. But neither of them knew that someone else had just arrived in London. Someone holding papers that could destroy Clara's life, and who was determined to take her back. Before the 30 nights were over. 30 nights. That was all the time Clara Bennet had promised herself she would stay at Ashcroft Manor. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet somehow only 2 weeks had passed, and the grand estate no longer felt like a stranger's house. Felt like home. Mrs. Abigail treated her like a daughter. The servants had grown fond of her cheerful nature. Even the village children eagerly waited for her visits every Sunday. And then there was Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft, the man everyone feared, the man who barely smiled, the man who insisted he preferred solitude. Yet every day, Clara discovered another piece of the gentle soul hidden beneath his cold exterior. One morning, she walked into the library and nearly burst out laughing. The mighty Duke of Ashcroft was sitting in an armchair, with 3 tiny kittens sleeping in his lap. Nathaniel looked horrified. "Miss Bennet." Clara struggled to contain her laughter. "Your Grace." He quickly picked up the kittens. "This is not what it looks like." She laughed openly. "I believe it looks exactly like a duke being held hostage by kittens." To his own surprise, Nathaniel laughed too, a genuine laugh. The sound startled both of them, because neither could remember the last time they had heard it. As the days passed, their conversations became easier. Their dinners lasted longer, and the walls around Nathaniel's heart slowly began to crumble. One evening, while walking through the gardens, Clara asked softly, "Were you very happy with Lady Elizabeth?" Nathaniel smiled sadly. "Very. You still love her." "I always will." Clara nodded. "And that's beautiful." He looked at her. "Most people think I should forget." "No." She smiled gently. "Love doesn't disappear simply because someone is gone." For a moment he could only stare at her. No one had ever understood his grief so perfectly. And perhaps, for the first time in years, he realized that loving again didn't mean betraying the past. But peace rarely lasts. One afternoon, a furious man stormed into Ashcroft Manor. Mr. Victor Hale, the very business partner responsible for Clara's father's ruin. His eyes immediately locked onto her. "There you are." Clara turned pale. Nathaniel stepped forward. "Who are you?" Victor sneered. "That girl belongs to me." The room fell silent. Clara began trembling. "He forged my father's debts," she whispered. "He ruined us." Victor waved several papers. "Legal documents." She signed a contract. Nathaniel calmly took the papers. He read them once, then twice, and his expression darkened. "They're forged." Victor smirked. "Can you prove it?" "No." Nathaniel folded the papers. "But I can destroy you." Victor laughed. "You cannot intimidate me, Duke." Nathaniel's voice became dangerously soft. "That was not intimidation. It was a promise." Even the servants shivered. Victor hesitated. But before leaving, he pointed at Clara. "She'll come back to me, one way or another." That night, Clara sat alone in the music room. Tears streamed down her face. "I should leave," she whispered. Nathaniel entered quietly. "No. He's dangerous." "I know. He'll ruin you." Nathaniel sat beside her. "Clara." She looked up. "I have already lost the woman I loved most. I will not stand by and lose another person I care about." Her eyes widened. Care about. Not pity. Not obligation. Care. But before she could answer, Nathaniel rose and left. He hadn't meant to say that, and yet, it was true. The next day, Mrs. Abigail entered the drawing room carrying a letter. It arrived from the solicitor. Nathaniel opened it. His face changed. "What is it?" Clara asked. He looked at her in disbelief. "Your father wasn't ruined." "What?" "He was robbed." According to the documents, Victor Hale had stolen nearly everything from Clara's father, including properties, bank accounts, and investments. And legally, they all belonged to Clara. She wasn't poor. She was one of the wealthiest heiresses in England. Clara stared in shock. No! Nathaniel smiled. Yes. For the first time in months, hope returned to her eyes. But their happiness lasted only seconds, because a servant came running into the room. Your Grace! Nathaniel stood. What is it? The servant's face had turned white. Mr. Hale has been arrested. Good. No, sir. The servant swallowed hard. He was attacked before the police arrived. What? He is dying. Nathaniel frowned. Who attacked him? The servant's answer froze everyone in the room. Before losing consciousness, Mr. Hale gave one name. Clara's breathing stopped. Name? The servant looked directly at Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft. He said, "The Duke tried to kill me," and within the hour, officers from London arrived at Ashcroft Manor, with a warrant for the arrest of Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft. The arrival of the London officers stunned everyone at Ashcroft Manor. Clara felt the blood drain from her face as the chief inspector stepped forward. "Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft," he announced solemnly. "By order of the Crown, you are under investigation for the attempted murder of Mr. Victor Hale." Mrs. Abigail gasped. Impossible! Nathaniel himself remained remarkably calm. "I assume Mr. Hale made this accusation before losing consciousness." The inspector nodded. "He named you personally." Clara stepped forward immediately. "That's absurd." "His Grace has been here all evening." The inspector sighed. "Miss Bennet, we are simply following procedure." Without resistance, Nathaniel handed over his sword. "I will cooperate." "Your Grace!" Clara cried. He looked at her and offered a reassuring smile. "Do not worry." But worry was all she could do. The next few days were unbearable. Although Nathaniel was not imprisoned, he was confined to London under supervision while the investigation continued. Society delighted in the scandal. Newspapers attacked him. Old enemies resurfaced, and whispers spread throughout England. The Ice Duke has finally revealed his true nature. Clara refused to believe a single word. She knew the man behind the title, the man who rescued stray cats, the man who quietly funded orphanages, the man who still brought white roses to his wife's grave. No, Nathaniel Ashcroft was incapable of such cruelty, and she intended to prove it. With Mrs. Abigail's help, Clara began examining Victor Hale's records. Late one evening, while sorting through ledgers, she noticed something strange. Several payments had been made under false names. One name appeared repeatedly, Edmund Crane, but Mrs. Abigail froze when she heard it. Edmund Crane. Yes, the old woman paled. He was Lord Ashcroft's former steward. What happened to him? He was dismissed 5 years ago for theft. Clara's eyes widened. And Victor Hale paid him? Suddenly, everything became clear. Someone had been helping Victor. Someone who hated Nathaniel. Meanwhile, Victor Hale regained consciousness. Before anyone could question him further, another attack was attempted. Fortunately, the police stopped the assailant. And to everyone's astonishment, the attacker was Edmund Crane. Cornered and terrified, Crane confessed everything. Victor Hale had hired him years earlier. Together they had stolen Clara's inheritance and forged the debts. But when Victor feared exposure, he tried to blackmail Crane. Panicked, Crane attacked him to keep him silent. And knowing society's hatred for the cold Duke, Victor had falsely accused Nathaniel in hopes of destroying him before dying. With the truth exposed, all charges against Nathaniel were dismissed. Victor Hale survived long enough to stand trial. Both he and Edmund Crane were sentenced to prison. At last, justice prevailed. Weeks later, Nathaniel returned home. As his carriage approached Ashcroft Manor, he expected silence. Instead, he found flowers decorating the entrance. Children from the orphanage lined the driveway. Mrs. Abigail stood proudly at the front, and waiting in the center was Clara. Smiling, Nathaniel stepped out of the carriage. You organized all this? She nodded. Someone had to welcome you home. For the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. Home. He had almost forgotten what that word meant. Soon, the 30th night arrived. The contract had ended. Clara quietly entered the library. Nathaniel stood by the fireplace. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, he forced a smile. Well, it seems your 30 nights are over. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, you are free. His voice remained steady, though his heart felt shattered. You may leave whenever you wish. Silence. Then she smiled. What if I don't want to? Nathaniel blinked. What? What if I wish to stay? He stared at her. Clara, you bought 30 nights. She stepped closer. But somewhere along the way, you gave me something far greater. A home, a family, and hope. Tears appeared in his eyes. But Elizabeth, Clara gently took his hand. I know, and I know you'll always love her. He nodded. I will. She smiled. Then let us honor her memory together. Because loving again doesn't mean loving her less. At that moment, something inside Nathaniel finally healed. The guilt he had carried for 5 years. The loneliness. The grief. All of it. Slowly, he raised her hand to his lips. Clara Bennett. His voice trembled. Would you stay? A tear slipped down her cheek. Forever. 6 months later, England celebrated the wedding of Duke Nathaniel Ashcroft and Clara Bennett. But what people remembered most was not the ceremony. It was what happened afterward. Together, the Duke and Duchess transformed Ashcroft Manor into a place of kindness. They built schools, expanded orphanages, and opened hospitals for the poor. Years later, children throughout the countryside would smile whenever they saw the Duke's carriage. Because unlike the cold man society once feared, Nathaniel Ashcroft had become beloved. And whenever people asked how such a miracle had happened, Mrs. Abigail always laughed and replied, "Oh, that's easy. His Grace bought 30 nights. And somehow, he ended up finding forever." The end.